Mark Vance, the relentless heir to a real estate empire, saw love as a superfluous weakness. Alongside his perfect fiancée, Laura, he stepped into a silver elevator on the 23rd floor of a New York skyscraper. The doors opened to reveal Julia, the woman he had buried in his past, now holding a mysterious boy in her arms, Ethan. The corporate air suffocated him with exchanged glances and unspoken secrets. What would this unexpected encounter unearth from Mark's frozen heart? Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This way you will always receive our thrilling stories. Comment on which city you are watching us from. We love to know how far our stories reach. Mark Vance adjusted the knot of his Italian tie in front of the mirror of his Upper East Side apartment. The reflection staring back was that of a successful man. At 30 years old, with a strong jawline and brown eyes that rarely showed emotion, just as his father, Octavio Vance, had always desired. "You were born to lead this empire," Octavio had repeated since Mark was a child. And he had believed it. He sacrificed friendships, passions, dreams, everything for the duty of being the perfect heir to Vance Enterprises. Laura appeared behind him, sliding her fingers over her fiancé's shoulder. She was beautiful, elegant, from the right family. The wedding was set for 3 months from now. "Ready for the meeting?" she asked indifferently. "Always," Mark replied, but something weighed on his chest. He did not love Laura. He knew it. She knew it too. The marriage was a strategic merger between two powerful families. Love was a luxury that men like him could not afford. As the driver navigated the Mercedes down Fifth Avenue, Mark gazed out the window, not truly seeing the city. His mind wandered back 5 years to a face he had forced himself to forget. Julia, the girl with the sincere smile who worked at a local bookstore. She had made him feel human, not just a surname. "Why did you break up with me?" he had asked that rainy night. "Because our worlds are too different, Mark," she had replied, tears in her eyes. "You will never choose me over your empire." He hadn't fought for her. He had let her go. After all, Julia was right, wasn't she? Duty came first. "We've arrived," the driver announced. Mark stepped out of the car and looked at the imposing commercial building. Another meeting, another $1 million contract. His life was an endless sequence of empty achievements. "Let's go," Laura urged, already typing something on her phone. He nodded, and they headed for the elevators. Not even in his worst nightmares did Mark imagine that in just a few minutes his meticulously constructed world would crumble, that behind those silver doors on the 23rd floor, the past he had buried was about to resurface, bringing with it a truth that would shatter the invisible chains binding him. But for now, he was just the perfect heir, walking into another ordinary day of his extraordinarily empty life. The lobby of the building was everything one would expect. Marble, crystal chandeliers, hurried executives with their leather briefcases. Mark and Laura waited for the elevator in silence. She checked emails while he checked the hands of his Tag Heuer. "Meeting at 11, Laura murmured. "We can't be late." Mark merely nodded. His thoughts were still trapped in that memory of Julia, as if the very air of the city conspired to bring her back to his mind that morning. The elevator bell rang. The silver doors opened and then time stopped. Julia was inside the elevator, thinner, with shorter hair, but unmistakably her, the same green eyes that haunted him during sleepless nights, and in her arms, a boy with dark curls. Julia. The word slipped from Mark's lips before he could control it. She paled. For a moment it seemed she would flee, but the elevator was full. There was nowhere to go. "Mark," she whispered, clutching the child to her chest. "Do you know each other?" Laura raised an eyebrow, more curious than concerned. The silence in that confined space was deafening. Mark couldn't take his eyes off the boy, 4, maybe 5 years old, and there, on the small neck, a crescent-shaped birthmark, identical to his. It can't be, Mark thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. It can't be. The elevator began to descend. Each floor felt like an eternity. Julia kept her gaze fixed on the illuminated numbers, avoiding him. The boy, oblivious to the emotional storm around them, played with a toy car. "Mommy, why are you shaking?" the child asked innocently. "I'm cold, my love," Julia lied, her voice trembling. Mark felt the world spinning back 5 years. Time was ticking precisely. He did the math quickly. The sudden breakup, her disappearance, the unanswered messages. "Julia, we need to talk," he said, his voice firmer than he thought he could manage. "We have nothing to talk about," she replied, still not looking at him. "I think we do." Laura watched the scene with growing irritation. "Mark, our meeting. Wait." He cut her off in a tone she had never heard before. The elevator finally reached the ground floor. The doors opened. Julia practically ran out, but Mark followed, leaving Laura behind. "Julia, please. That boy, he is." She stopped, turned slowly, and in her eyes, Mark saw 5 years of pain, loneliness, and a strength he never knew she possessed. "Your son," she completed, her voice now firm. "The son you never wanted to know." Inside the elevator seconds before, Mark's world had already begun to implode. He tried to process the impossible as the floor numbers decreased. 18, 17, 16. The boy looked up, straight at Mark. "Hi, mister," he said with a smile that broke something inside him. "Ethan, don't talk to strangers," Julia whispered, pulling her son closer. Ethan, the name echoed in Mark's mind like a punch. He had a son named Ethan, who called him Mister. "Julia, look at me," Mark pleaded, but she kept her eyes fixed on the panel. Digital. Laura, finally realizing that something was wrong, furrowed her brow. "Mark, who is this woman?" "No one important," Julia replied before he could speak, each word laden with bitterness. "Don't say that," Mark shot back. "You never cared, did you?" She looked at him for the first time, and the pain in those green eyes hit him like a blade. "Then why did you let your father offer me money to disappear?" The entire elevator seemed to suck the oxygen out of the air. Mark felt the ground slip from beneath his feet. "What are you saying?" "Don't pretend you don't know." Julia's voice trembled. $1 million to make me disappear with the inconvenient pregnancy were his exact words. I didn't know," Mark stammered. "My father never—" "Of course you knew," she interrupted. "You always knew everything your father did. You just chose not to know this time." Laura let out a short, nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous, Mark. Let's go." But he couldn't move. The revelation paralyzed him. Ottavio had done this. He had offered money to Julia. And why? Because he had never said anything. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Ethan asked, touching his mother's face. Julia quickly wiped her tears. "It's nothing, my love. We're leaving soon." "Please, Mark." He reached out, but she pulled away as if his touch burned her. "You had 5 years to find me, Mark. 5 years. I was in the same city for an entire year before I moved. You never came, because you said it was over. You left me. I was pregnant and scared." She exploded, and everyone in the elevator looked. "You only talked about business, expanding the empire, impressing your father. I knew a baby didn't fit into those plans, and when Ottavio confirmed that, with that damn check, Her voice broke. The elevator reached the ground floor. The silver doors opened to the marble lobby, but for Mark, they opened to an abyss where his carefully constructed life was crumbling. In the lobby, away from the ears of other passengers, the truth continued to unfold like an old wound being reopened. Julia tried to step away, but Mark blocked her path, not with aggression, but with desperation. "Did you tear up the check?" he asked, still processing. "In front of him, Mark," she replied, raising her chin with wounded pride. "I wasn't for sale. My son wasn't for sale." Our son, Mark thought but didn't dare say aloud. Ethan, oblivious to the adult's drama, tugged at Julia's sleeve. "Mommy, where's Grandma's lawyer?" "We're coming, my love," she said, but her voice was choked. Mark knelt down to Ethan's height. Up close, the similarities were undeniable. The same almond-shaped brown eyes, the same face shape, and that birthmark. "Can I see?" he asked Julia, pointing to Ethan's neck. "Why?" she challenged. "Please." Julia hesitated, then gently pulled back the collar of her son's shirt. There it was, the perfect crescent moon, identical to the one Mark had carried since birth. His grandmother used to say it was a warrior's mark. Now his son carried it too. "God," Mark whispered, his eyes misting. "He is me." "Yes," Julia confirmed, her own voice breaking. "He is yours. And you lost 4 years of his life because your father thought money would solve the problem." Laura, watching from a distance with growing impatience, finally approached. "Mark, is this some kind of scam? This woman shows up out of nowhere with a child, and you just believe her." "It's not a scam," Mark said, not taking his eyes off Ethan. "It's the truth." "The truth?" Laura let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't even know she existed 5 minutes ago." "Why did my father hide her from me?" he exploded, turning to his fiancée. "Don't you understand? He hid me from her." The entire lobby stopped to look. Security began to approach. Julia, frightened by the scene, picked up Ethan. "I need to go," she said. "It was a mistake to come to New York. I knew it was a mistake." "No." Mark gently held her arm. "Please, don't go. Not again. I need to know him, to know my son." Julia stared at him, and in that look there were years of accumulated hurt. "You want to know him now, after everything?" "I didn't know, Julia. I swear on everything that I didn't know." "But you should have suspected," she shot back. "I disappeared from your life overnight, Mark. Didn't you ever find that strange? Didn't you ever want to know why?" He opened his mouth, but had no answer because she was right. He had chosen not to search, chosen to believe she had simply left him. It was easier that way, less complicated for the perfect heir. "I'm so sorry." It was all he could manage to say. And for the first time in 5 years, Julia saw something human in Mark Vance's eyes, something beyond the cold businessman. She saw a broken man holding the shards of what could have been. "I'm sorry. It's not enough," Julia said. But her voice was softer now, anger giving way to deep sadness. "You weren't there when I got sick in the first trimester. You weren't there when Ethan was born after 18 hours of labor. You weren't there on the nights he cried with fever, and I thought I was going to go crazy with worry alone." Each word was a stab to Mark. He imagined Julia pregnant, alone, scared. He imagined his son being born without him knowing. 4 years of birthdays, first words, first steps, all lost. "I want to make it up to you," he said. "I know I can't turn back time, but I can be present. Now please let me try." Laura let out an indignant exclamation. "Are you serious, Mark? We have a wedding planned. Contracts signed between our families." "Contracts," he repeated, turning to her. "Is that what this is about? Our marriage is a contract." And then Laura crossed her arms. Marcelo felt the weight of his emotions. He always knew this. Don't pretend you expected anything different. She was right. But now, looking at Julia holding Ethan, Mark saw everything with painful clarity. He was about to commit to a loveless marriage while his true son grew up without a father. "Mummy, who is that man?" Ethan asked, looking at Mark with innocent curiosity. Julia took a deep breath, and Mark saw the internal struggle in her eyes. She could lie, could say he was nobody and walk away, but she didn't. That man. She started, her voice trembling. Yes, he's your father, Ethan. The world stopped. Mark felt warm tears streaming down his face, unable to control them. Hi, Ethan, he whispered. I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you. The boy tilted his head, processing. You're my daddy? Like Arthur's dad from school? Yes. Mark could barely speak. Like Arthur's dad. Cool. Arthur said that Daddy plays soccer with him. Do you play soccer? Mark let out a wet laugh through tears. I'm learning. I promise I'll learn. Laura watched the scene with a cold, calculating expression. Mark knew her well enough to understand she was mentally calculating. An illegitimate child, child support, social scandal. She was re-evaluating the investment. And that's absolutely ridiculous, Laura declared. Mark, you barely know this woman. How do you know the boy is really yours? The birthmark, Julia replied before Mark could. You can ask for a DNA test if you want. I have nothing to hide, but the truth is on his neck, identical to Mark's. Laura narrowed her eyes. Convenient. You disappear for 5 years and reappear just as Mark is about to marry the heiress of the Johnsons. What a remarkable coincidence. Coincidence? Julia stepped forward, her eyes sparkling. I didn't even know you would be here. I came to settle my grandmother's estate. Do you think I want anything from him? I raised my son alone for 4 years. I worked 2 jobs, spent sleepless nights. I don't need the Vances. Mark looked at Julia with a mix of admiration and regret. She was different from the shy girl he had known, stronger, more determined. Motherhood had transformed her into a warrior. Tell me about the check, he asked. I need to know exactly what happened. Julia held Ethan close, as if the child were her shield. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just found out about the pregnancy a week ago and was trying to gather the courage to tell you. Then, your father showed up at the bookstore where I worked. Mark closed his eyes, imagining the scene. He said, Julia continued, her voice trembling with the memory. You seem like a smart girl, Julia. Smart enough to know you have no place in my son's life. Then he put the check in front of me, $1 million, and said it was to solve the problem and disappear. My God, Mark whispered. I was pregnant, hormonal, scared, but mostly I was angry. Angry at you for never standing up for our relationship, angry at him for treating me like I was trash. So I took the check, tore it in front of him and said, my son is not a problem to be solved. Laura let out a dry laugh. How dramatic. And now you're here without the money and with a child to raise alone. You must be regretting that noble decision. Never, Julia replied without hesitation. Not for a second. Ethan is the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'd rather fight alone than accept crumbs from people who think everything has a price. Mark felt shame burning in his chest. He had been raised to believe that money solved everything, that people could be bought, replaced, discarded. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Why did you just leave? Because you chose me, Mark, Julia replied. And there was genuine pain in her voice. In that last month before I found out about the pregnancy, you were becoming more distant, only talking about work, proving your worth to Ottavio, taking on more responsibilities at the company. I knew a baby would be seen as an obstacle, not a blessing. You should have given me the chance to choose differently, and you would have, she challenged him. Honestly, Mark, if I had come to you 5 years ago pregnant, would you have dropped everything to be with me? Would you have faced your father? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Julia said sadly. So I chose to protect my son from growing up in an environment where he would be seen as a mistake. I moved to Chicago, started over. Was it hard? Yes, but Ethan grew up loved, safe, happy. That's worth more than any mansion on the Upper East Side. Ethan, bored with the adult conversation, was fiddling with his mother's phone. Mummy, can we go now? The office guy is waiting. We'll be there soon, sweetheart. No. Mark gently held Julia's hand. Please, give me a chance. I know I don't deserve it, but he deserves to have a father, and I promise I've changed. I will change. I will prove it to you. Julia looked at the man she once loved, now with tears in his eyes, broken and vulnerable. Part of her wanted to believe, but the part that had suffered alone, that had raised a child without help, that part was more cautious. We'll see. That was all she said before stepping away, taking with her the son Mark had barely begun to know. Julia had taken only 3 steps toward the exit when Laura caught up with her, the sound of her Louboutin heels echoing on the marble like a sentence. Her normally composed face, perfect in social elegance, now wore a cruel smile. "Wait a moment," Laura said, blocking the way. "Before you leave here playing the victim, let's clarify one thing." "Laura, no," Mark warned, but she ignored him. "You're smart, I have to admit." Laura continued circling Julia like a predator, assessing her prey. "You show up out of nowhere with a cute little child. In her lap, tears in her eyes, a moving story. But let's be honest here. What you have in your arms is no longer a baby, it's a goldmine." Julia paled, clutching Ethan to her chest. "How dare you? A hefty child support payment, perhaps even paternity recognition with inheritance rights." Laura counted off on her fingers. Pure venom. "You must have planned this casual encounter months ago. You found out that Mark was engaged, did your research on the Vance family fortune, and decided it was time to cash in." "You know nothing about me," Julia replied, her voice trembling with indignation. "I know enough. Women like you always know exactly what they're doing." She tears up the check in a grand, dramatic gesture, disappears to create a mystery, and then reappears at the perfect moment with the child to gain sympathy. "Enough." Mark stepped between them, his voice thundering through the lobby. Security glanced in their direction. "Laura, you have crossed all boundaries. I have." She turned her fury on him. "Mark, open your eyes. This woman is manipulating you." "The only person I see manipulating someone here is you," he shot back, "and I will not allow you to humiliate the mother of my child, the mother of your supposed child," Laura corrected. "You haven't even done a DNA test. I don't need a test to know the truth," Mark said, pointing at Ethan. "Look at him, Laura. Really, look." But Laura wasn't interested in looking. She was recalculating, replanning. Her brain, trained since childhood for business transactions, was already processing the numbers. Public scandal, child support, asset division, possible heir recognition. The marriage that seemed like a solid investment now appeared risky. "Do you know what this means for us?" she asked, lowering her voice to a cold whisper. "For our families? For the business?" "Honestly, Laura." Mark looked at her with a clarity he had never had before. "I don't care." The shock on her face would have been comical under different circumstances. "You don't care, Mark? Our marriage was planned years ago. Contracts were signed. Expectations were set. Contracts can be undone, expectations revised." Julia watched the argument with a mix of disbelief and something she dared not call hope. Could it be possible that Mark would really choose differently this time? "Mom, why is that lady yelling at you?" Ethan asked, looking at Mark with innocent confusion. The child's question broke something inside Mark. He knelt in front of his son. "Because sometimes adults are foolish and forget what really matters. But I promise I will fix this." "You really promise?" Ethan asked. "I promise?" Laura let out a bitter laugh. "This is pathetic. You're throwing away our entire life for a child you met 5 minutes ago? No!" Mark stood up, facing her. "I am finally making the choice I should have made 5 years ago." That night, Mark could hardly sleep. He had asked for Julia's number before she left, and she had hesitated for long seconds before writing it down on a crumpled piece of paper she took from her bag. For matters related to Ethan, she had said just that. Now, at 3 a.m., he stared at that number on his phone, too afraid to dial. Julia was probably already asleep. Or maybe not. Maybe she was awake too, replaying the impossible encounter of that day. Laura was in the guest room. After the scene in the lobby, they returned to the apartment in glacial silence. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just said she needed to think and locked herself in. Mark knew that language. Laura was doing exactly what the surname Vance had taught her, calculating risks, projecting scenarios, deciding if the investment was still worth it. The next morning, she emerged in the dining room, impeccably dressed as always, already wearing grey Tyler. She sat at the table where Mark was having coffee or trying to. He barely touched the cup. "We need to talk," she announced. "I know. I spent the night analyzing the situation from every possible angle." Laura began, and Mark recognized the tone. It was the voice she used in business meetings, and I came to some conclusions. "I'm listening. Our marriage as planned is no longer viable." Mark raised his eyes, surprised. He expected resistance, perhaps ultimatums. No, this clinical declaration. "Do you agree?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," he admitted. "I think we always knew it wasn't love, but it wasn't meant to be love." She interrupted him. "It was supposed to be a strategic partnership, and partnerships only work when the terms are clear and the assets secure." "Assets," Mark repeated bitterly. "That's how you see everything, isn't it? Don't be a hypocrite, Mark. You were raised the same way. The difference is that I don't want to be anything else." She was right, and it hurt more than he expected. "Now you have an illegitimate child." Laura continued listing as if she were taking inventory. "This means substantial child support. He could seek legal recognition of paternity and inheritance rights. Your public image will be tarnished by the scandal. Your father will be furious. And if this Julia is even remotely intelligent, she will seek compensation for 5 years of single parenting." "She's not like that," Mark defended. "Maybe not, but the situation is what it is, with or without her intention." Laura picked up the coffee cup, took a measured sip, and considering all this, our marriage has ceased to be a good business deal. The brutal frankness was almost refreshing. At least she wasn't pretending. "My family expected a clean union with the Vances, without complications," she continued. "You come with a stained past now. You already have an heir. You will have perpetual financial obligations. The numbers no longer add up. So you are ending things with me?" Mark asked, surprised to find he felt relief, not sadness. "I'm dissolving our partnership," she corrected. "Tomorrow I will publicly announce that the engagement has been mutually dissolved. I will blame irreconcilable differences in values, which technically isn't a lie." "Laura, no!" She raised her hand. "Don't try to convince me otherwise. Business decisions must Mark learn to be cold and immediate from his father. When an investment no longer yields adequate returns, you withdraw. It's that simple." Mark observed the woman he had planned to spend his life with. She was calm, resolute, without a tear or genuine disappointment, just a cold calculation of losses and gains. "Don't you feel anything?" he asked. "Nothing at all." "I feel relief," she replied honestly. "Our marriage would have been comfortable, but unremarkable. Perhaps it's better this way." She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and added, "Mark, a word of advice from someone who knows you well. Your father will declare war when he hears about this. Prepare yourself." With that, Laura left the room and minutes later exited his life. He heard the apartment door close, and for the first time in years, Mark took a deep breath, feeling a tremendous weight lift off his shoulders. The summons arrived before noon, a terse message from Ottavio's assistant. "Your father wants to see you at the office now." Mark knew this. Moment would come. Laura wouldn't waste time. She had probably already called the Albuquerque family, who in turn contacted Otavio. The high society of New York operated this way: quick, efficient, ruthless. Otavio Vance's office occupied the top floor of Vance Developments. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of New York City. But Mark had never felt smaller there than at that moment, crossing the solid mahogany door. Otavio stood with his back to him, gazing at the city he had helped build. At 65, he was still imposing. Broad shoulders, impeccably grey hair, a posture that exuded power. "Sit down," he ordered without turning around. Mark remained standing. "I prefer it this way." Otavio finally turned. His face was a mask of contained fury. "Laura ended the engagement, I know, because of some nobody and a bastard." "No," Mark's voice came out low, dangerous, "because of my son's mother and my son. And you will never, ever refer to them that way again." "Your son?" Otavio let out a dry laugh. "You don't even know if that child is really yours. She's using you, Mark, like they all do. Like you tried to use her, I mean offering $1 million for her to disappear." The silence that followed was deafening. Otavio didn't deny it. He just stiffened his shoulders. "I did what was necessary," he said. "You had a bright future ahead. I wasn't going to let some nobody destroy that with a trap pregnancy." "Trap pregnancy?" Mark stepped forward. "I loved that woman, and you kicked her out of my life without giving me a choice because you thought I would make the wrong one." Otavio exploded. "You are my heir, Mark. I built this empire for you, and you were going to throw it all away. Why? For love. Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't build skyscrapers." "No," Mark agreed, and something broke inside him, something that had been trapped for 30 years. "But love builds families. Love creates memories. Love makes life worth living." "Cheap philosophy," Otavio spat. "You're talking like a conformist failure or a man who finally woke up." Mark walked to the desk, picked up the Mont Blanc pen Otavio had given him when he took the vice presidency. "I resign." "What?" "I resign from my position. I renounce the inheritance. I renounce everything." He placed the pen firmly on the desk. "I no longer want to be part of this." Otavio turned pale. "Are you crazy? You're throwing away everything we've worked to build." "You built it, Father. I just followed orders like a good soldier. But now I have a son who needs a present father, not an absent millionaire. That kid doesn't even know you." "Whose fault is that?" Mark shot back. "You robbed me of 5 years with him. 5 years I'll never get back. First words, first steps, all lost, because you thought you knew what was best for me." "I knew." Otavio slammed his fist on the table. "Look at you now, destroying your life over cheap sentimentality." "No, Father. I'm finally living my life. For the first time in 30 years, I'm making a choice that's mine, not yours. Mine." Mark turned to leave, but Otavio's voice stopped him. "If you walk through that door, you will be dead to me." Mark looked back at the man who had once been his hero. Now he saw only a bitter man alone at the top of an empty empire. "I was already dead, Father. You just didn't realize it." And he walked through the door. 2 months later, Mark was carrying the last box into the rented apartment in Chicago. It was modest. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a functional kitchen. Nothing compared to the penthouse in the Upper East Side, but it was his, earned through honest work. He had secured a job as a project manager at a local construction company. The salary was a fraction of what he earned at Vance Developments, but it was enough to pay rent, food, dignity. Julia still didn't fully trust him. She allowed supervised visits with Ethan, always in public spaces, parks, malls, diners. She watched every interaction like a hawk protecting its chick. Mark didn't complain. He deserved the distrust. That Saturday afternoon, he took Ethan to Lincoln Park. The boy ran ahead, chasing pigeons, laughing in a way that made Mark's heart swell. "Daddy, look!" Ethan pointed at the swans on the lake. "Daddy!" The word still caught him off guard every time, making his eyes burn with emotion. "They're beautiful," Mark said, kneeling beside his son. "The teacher said swans stay together forever," Ethan remarked with the seriousness of a child. "Like you and Mommy?" The innocent question cut deep. "Me and your mother?" "It's complicated, champ. Why didn't you live with us before?" "Because I was foolish. Very foolish. But I'm trying to make it right. And you will." Mark looked at Julia, who was watching from a distance sitting on a bench. She wore a simple floral dress, her hair blowing in the wind. She was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "I hope so," he replied honestly. That night Julia invited him to dinner at her apartment. It was the first time he entered the home where his son had grown up without him, modest. The room was clean, filled with Ethan's drawings on the walls. "He draws a lot," Mark commented, watching a child draw the family, mother, son, and the empty space where the father should be. "Since he was little," Julia replied while setting the table. "The psychologist said it was his way of processing the absence." Guilt burned again. "Julia, I didn't—" He was interrupted. "No more excuses. Excuses don't change the past. Only actions change the future. So let me act. Let me prove that I've changed." She studied him for a long time. "Why did you really come to Chicago, Mark?" "Honestly, because my son is here and because the woman I love is here." Julia looked away, but he saw the emotion in her eyes. "Don't say that. You don't know me anymore. 5 years is a long time. So let me get to know you again. Let me discover who you've become and let me show who I can be. I don't know if I can trust you again. I know, and I'm not asking for immediate trust. I'm asking for a chance to be present, to be a father, to be what you allow me to be." Ethan entered the kitchen at that moment, already in his pajamas. "Mommy, is Daddy going to sleep here tonight?" Julia and Mark exchanged glances. She took a deep breath. "Not tonight, my love, but maybe one day." And in her gaze, Mark saw something he hadn't seen in 5 years. Possibility. The reconquest wasn't a grand romantic gesture from a movie. It was built in the small moments that real life demands. Mark started picking Ethan up from school on Fridays. At first, the boy was still shy, but gradually he opened up. He talked about his friends, about classes, about the drawing he got an A on. "Arthur said his dad has a big car," Ethan commented one day. "Why do you have a small car?" Mark looked at the used Corolla he had bought. "Because I don't need a big car to be happy. I just need you." "Oh, okay then." And it was more than okay. On Sundays they played soccer in the park. Mark wasn't good at the sport, but he learned. Ethan laughed when he missed the kicks, and that laughter was worth more than any $1 million contract he had ever signed. But there were also the tough nights, like when Ethan had a high fever and Julia called desperately at 2 a.m. Mark arrived in 20 minutes with medicine and cold water. He stayed until dawn, doing compresses, singing songs he didn't know he knew, holding his son's warm little hand. "You didn't have to stay," Julia whispered, exhausted. "Yes, I did. This is where I want to be." Julia fell asleep on the couch, and Mark covered her with a blanket. When the sun rose and Ethan's fever broke, he looked at that scene, son sleeping, woman he loved resting, and he knew he had made the right choice. With Julia, the reconquest was even more delicate. He started with small gestures, flowers on her birthday, her favorite snack when she mentioned a tough day at work, offering to fix the leaky faucet. "You don't have to do that," she would say. "I know, I want to." One night after Ethan fell asleep, they talked on her apartment balcony. The city stretched out below them, lights twinkling in the darkness. "Sometimes I still get angry at you," Julia admitted. "Anger for having been alone, for going through so much without help." "You have every right. But then I see you with Ethan. I see how you try, how you show up day after day, even when it's hard, and the anger diminishes. Is it diminishing enough for you to consider?" Mark left the question hanging. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. You hurt me, Mark. You abandoned me when I needed you the most. I know. And if I could turn back time, but you can't. No one can. So all we have is now. It's today. It's every choice we make from here on out. So let me choose you every day. Let me wake up and choose to be present, choose to be a father, choose to love you." Julia looked at him with tears in her eyes. "And if I let you, and you give up again?" "Ethan already loves you, Mark. If you leave now, it will destroy him." "I won't, I swear I won't." "How can I believe that? Give me time, let me prove it." And she did. Day after day, week after week, she let him prove it, and Mark took every opportunity. 6 months later, on a rainy Sunday, Ethan was drawing in the living room while Mark and Julia prepared dinner together. It was a simple, domestic, perfect routine. Ethan called him. "Come see." It was a new drawing, Mommy, Daddy, and son together, complete. "It's our family," Ethan announced proudly. Julia took Mark's hand. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't let go. "Yes," she whispered, "our family." And Mark knew he had come home. 3 years had passed since that impossible encounter in the elevator. Mark was in the small backyard of the house he had managed to buy. Nothing compared to the Vance mansions, but it was theirs, pushing Ethan on the swing. "Higher, Dad!" the 7-year-old boy shouted, laughing. "Higher doesn't work, or you'll go to Mars," Mark joked. Julia watched from the balcony, a hand on her slightly rounded belly, 5 months pregnant, a girl. They were going to name her Luna. Mark still worked at the construction company, having been promoted to project director. He wasn't rich, but they earned well. They had enough, and he discovered that enough was abundance when there was love. His phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello, Mark Vance." It was a distant, a formal voice. "Yes, this is Chicago General Hospital. It's about Thomas Vance. He suffered a massive heart attack. He's in ICU. He asked for you." Mark froze. 3 years without contact with his father. 3 years of absolute silence. "And now I'm going to Chicago," he said. Julia appeared by his side immediately. "What happened?" "My father is in the hospital." "It's serious." "Go," she said without hesitation. "Go make amends." But when Mark arrived at Chicago General Hospital the next day, he found Thomas alone in a luxurious ICU, without friends, without family, just nurses and machines. The old man looked different, smaller, frail, his hair completely white now, his face marked by suffering. "Mark," Thomas whispered when he saw him. "You came? Come. I thought you wouldn't come. After everything." "I thought I wouldn't come either," Mark admitted, sitting beside the bed. "But Julia convinced me. She says holding a grudge is poison we take, hoping the other person dies. Julia." Thomas repeated the name with difficulty. "She forgave you then?" "Gradually. It took time, but yes, she forgave me. And Ethan, he's 7 now, and is going to have a little sister in 4 months. For the first time, Mark saw tears in his father's eyes. "I ruined everything," Thomas whispered. "I built an immense empire, and I have no one to leave it to. I died alone, even before I died. Are you still alive, Dad?" "Not for long." The doctor said weeks, maybe days. He winced and the machine beeped. "Mark, I was wrong about everything. You tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. I know. The company was sold. The partners took everything. There was no heir." Then he laughed bitterly. "I spent my whole life building, and in the end, it meant nothing. It meant something to you back then. Mark said, "I won't pretend I've completely forgiven you. You stole 5 years with my son, but I also won't carry hatred. That doesn't change the past. You are a better man than I am," Thomas admitted. "You achieved what I never could. You found what really matters." They sat in silence for a long time. Mark held his father's wrinkled hand. "I wish I could meet him," Thomas whispered. "Finally, my grandson." "I'll bring Ethan to meet you," Mark promised. "And maybe if you want, you can try to be the grandfather you never were." Thomas passed away 3 weeks later, but in those 3 weeks he met Ethan, heard his stories, saw his drawings, and for the first time in his life, Thomas Vance experienced unconditional love. On the last day, he held Mark's hand and whispered, "Did you understand? Did you understand what I spent my whole life not learning? True success isn't signing million-dollar contracts. It's being present for those you love." Mark cried when his father left, not for the man he was, but for the man he could have been. At the funeral, few attended. Business. Associates, curious onlookers, journalists. But Mark was there with Julia, Ethan, and the promise of Lily growing in the belly of the woman he loved. As they returned to Chicago, Ethan asked, "Dad, was Grandpa happy?" Mark carefully thought about the answer. "Not as happy as he could have been, but in the end I think he found a bit of peace. And are you happy?" Mark looked at Julia, who was sleeping against him, at Ethan with his drawing in his lap, at the simple life they had built together. "I'm the happiest man in the world, champ," and it was true, because he had discovered long ago in that marble lobby 3 years earlier that true success wasn't measured by wealth or power. It was measured in moments, in the laughter of a child, in the touch of a wife, in the peace of sleeping without regrets. Mark Vance had lost an empire, but he had gained a family, and he wouldn't trade that for anything in this world. And do you also believe that true love can rebuild and form a new family? Write your answer in the comments. We would love to know your opinion. If you were moved by the story of Mark and Julia, subscribe to our channel and be enchanted by many other surprising stories.